On the 6th day of Christmas, my true love gave to me. The Laying Geese, or Fruit of Grudges, an original short story by Charlie C.C. Thomas. Once upon a time, in a land far away and forgotten by all who still draw breath, there was a town without neighbor or friend, and whose residents had long forgotten how they came to be there. But they were happy to be there, for they had their own customs and ways, their own times and celebrations, and their own trials and dangers, which kept them locked in the borders of their little town. Mostly. Now, in the south, there was a carriage drawn by 4 white geldings, with a single coachman and 2 guards in leather and mail either side him, while 2 courtiers went before and behind it, their riders leathered and carrying sword and bow. The band went east along the broad and largely empty cobble road of Marching Way, so named for the procession the settlers of that place had made against the woods folk in the early years after the flight of their predecessors. And within it, the carriage carried a man, past the prime of his life, yet still strong of body and mind, with a few extra pounds of fat for good measure. Lord Daniel Taylor. With the roads empty and the escorts there to move others aside, Lord Daniel had made good time from the departure of his manor in the northwest after daybreak, for when he looked out the ornate window slates, he could see the flooded pastures of Fisher Fields. His smile made his plump face wrinkle, it was so wide, but he didn't spur his driver on. There was no rush to see his vengeance wrought. It would happen that day, so why not savor his victory? He slid back in his seat until his balding head rested on the blue velvet cushion and his knees hit the seat across from him. His bright robes shifted around, the sashes and belts fell aside and between his legs until his sapphire breeches were plain to see had anyone else been there. The gold and silver woven tassels danced in the morning light, as the gold-cloth sash around his distended stomach did, as the gold-threaded vines and flowers at the hem of his outer and inner garments did also. He shifted uncomfortably as his robes hugged around his broad chest, squeezing him too tightly until he pulled at the hems enough to see his bare chest beneath and let his hard gut sag a little over his legs. He laid back again, muscled arms laying either side of him as he took a deep breath and heaved a smiling sigh. Visions danced behind his eyes, dreams or imaginations he did not know, but it was sweet all the same. The Lords Allen all gathered into a circle, William, Robert, and Matthew, but their fine clothes were replaced with tattered rags. Then he changed his mind and chuckled, seeing them instead naked and bony, with nests of hair and overgrown beards beneath wild red eyes. They would cry and bemoan their lost glory, and their children were dead around them, and their wives were bitter and being taken by other men, better men, like himself. Then Daniel Taylor bit his lip with a chuckle as Eleanor Allen came into his visions, crawling over him and casting her clothes aside to pleasure him, whilst her lord husband William watched in dismay. "Lord Daniel Taylor!" the coachman's voice boomed, jarring him up in his seat to readjust his robes. "He comes for audience with Lord Fisher." Then another man answered him, and the coachman replied, again and again until all was agreed upon, and large metal gates swung open. Then the horses whinnied, and the carriage drove on, letting Daniel see the enormous wrought-iron gates through his window, jutting from the 10-foot stone wall surrounding the Fisher estate, with a stone arch overhead another 3 feet at its zenith. But within, the lands of the Fishers were far from their namesake, a simple sloping field of grassy hills, with not one natural body of water near it, only once lush trees now turning fiery colors in the coming autumn. There were fountains dotting the hills, though, modelled after the stone circles of the old folk, like some strange altar where those ancient creatures would dance naked to stranger gods. Or so Daniel fancied. But before Fisher Manor, atop a hill near the rear of the estate, the grandest model of the stone circles stood, each pillar of white stone spitting streams of water from their tops to fill the shallow pool around them. The carriage rounded it, stopping before the grand entrance with its redwood double doors atop a great dais carved with leaping fish, otters on rocks, swans, and water spirits. When the carriage door opened and Daniel stepped onto the cobblestone drive, he breathed so deeply that he leaned back with his hands on his hips before the coachman handed him his black wood staff, topped in a hound's head of red and orange jasper. Without thanking the man, he clasped his hand over his cane in front of him and smiled wide when the door opened to reveal Lord William Fisher and his only son Jasper Fisher, the spitting image of his father. "William!" Daniel boomed merrily, arms going up and out as he approached the dais. William smiled, his short blonde hair still thick but going pale where it had been dark, like his son, while his once hazel eyes were the darker. Then Lord Fisher stepped out and embraced Lord Taylor, his simple black trousers and coat over the white linen shirt making him even paler, besides Daniel's fiery attire. Then the younger Fisher stepped forward, dressed in loose white linen tucked into black trousers tucked into riding boots. His eyes were still every bit as hazel as William's had been, and his long blonde hair sparkled like dusty gold in the morning light. Jasper held his hand out, and Daniel took it, their palms on each other's forearms for a moment before they let each other go and assumed a circle on the dais. "What a surprise, Lord Taylor," Jasper said with a crooked grin, every bit the trickster his father had been too. "You need not be so official, my boy. Call me by my Christian name, I insist." Daniel smiled, wide, his cheeks poking up under his dark eyes. Jasper smiled politely with a nod, but his father spoke instead. "You'll forgive my son. He plans to see his beloved soon and was nearly a horse when we heard call of you." Daniel chuckled and found the boy's face, his large hands spreading out gracefully. "I see. Well, I shan't keep a man from his woman, and if you're anything like your father, I don't think I could if I tried." "He is," William said. "I am," Jasper mimicked with a curling smirk, his weight shifting to one leg as he set a hand on his hip, and they all laughed together. "You're due to be wed soon, or am I wrong?" Daniel asked. "You have the right of it, sir," Jasper said with a tilt of his eyebrows and a flush to his throat. "Then I understand you are quite ready to see your beloved." Daniel leaned closer and said low, "Just remember, the Cunninghams don't take kindly to deflowered daughters before you're one of them, son." Jasper grinned like a fox and folded his arms. "I'm sure they don't, Daniel. It's a good thing we are the embodiment of etiquette, then, is it not?" William rolled his eyes, then chuckled and clapped his son on the shoulder. "Truly, there's no claim on this boy but mine. Don't get yourself gilded before you have children, son. I need an heir, after all." "Fret not, father." Jasper held his grin, his hazel eyes glinting like William's used to when they were boys, and he'd tell them of just how he convinced the maid to redress his bed, as he called it. "Fire, though it burns to turn the woods to ashes, does not cross the shore of righteousness which surrounds my lady love." "That artistry must come from your mother, boy, because William has never had use of it, not even in luring his companions." Daniel chuckled as Jasper assumed his old stance, the grin still there. "Oh, that it were a lie, though. It's some many years, and I do so wish to be a good son and give you grandchildren." Daniel barked a laugh. "Then I shall be brief indeed, my boy, lest you burst." He clapped his hands together, with the cane in the crook of his elbow, and found William's face. "I've heard and seen the beauty of your wares, my friend, and I wish to purchase one. Just one." "His wares?" Jasper asked with a slight laugh in his voice. My lord, you do understand they won't hatch to give you gold-laying geese of your own, yes? Oh, I know full well, and I've heard the horrors from those who've tried sitting them only for the shell to break. A truly nasty business you deal in, my friend. I will gladly sell you an egg, Dan, but you will hear my warning the same as all else, William said, waving a hand in the air in Daniel's general direction. I would expect nothing less, given the danger. He smiled wryly. Jasper? I'll send for it, father. Just the one, yes? Jasper asked Daniel, who gave a nod. Then the boy was turned and through the still open entryway, disappearing through the great foyer, alight by the dozens of windows arching around the grand entrance. Listen, and listen well, old friend, William said, pulling Daniel's eyes with the strange gravity of his voice. These are not baubles, nor trinkets, nor finery. When they are lain, they are danger gilded in gold. Keep one within your home, and the evils which have befallen you shall be taken into the egg itself, where it shall fester, and never be loosed. Prosperity shall reign upon you and your whole house. This is what you buy, not the gold of the shell. And the warning. Should you suffer the shell even the tiniest fracture, all the wicked evils which had been bound within shall be freed, and shall inflict curses on the house of the one who released it. Now the shell of the eggs are thick gold, so they do not break so easily as common eggs, but they will crack if fallen from a great enough height, or if smashed with enough force. So I shan't break it then, my friend. Daniel smiled pleasantly and gave a bemused sigh with a hand to William's shoulder. Very good, Will. I shall take great care not to break it for the sake of mine own, though I would ask something. Should it fall by chance or indirectly by another whilst held, should it shed its curses upon... well, who should receive them? The hands which indirectly cause its freedom shall see the curses take them, likewise those which hold the egg. If another jostles you and it falls from your hands, the responsibility to keep it secure was yours, not the one who made you drop it. The curse will fall on you, not him, William said matter-of-factly, and Daniel smiled with a nod. Thank you, and thank you, young Jasper, he said, looking behind his old friend as the younger emerged onto the dais with a chest large as his own. My, is it really as big as all that? No, Jasper said with a straining laugh. But there's enough cushion between the egg and the wood of the chest that nothing should break it even if your carriage were to turn over. Two gloved guards approached and took the chest from Jasper by the metal handles on either side. But Daniel held up his hand, and they stopped, holding it still as their lord undid the latches and opened the chest without a squeak. Inside, the golden egg shone in the morning light, its surface polished to a mirror and just smaller than Daniel's head. It rested in a carved groove of simple white cushions, making them look dark in comparison to its radiant gleam. Indeed, there was almost a subtle light surrounding it, a light that didn't shine yet caught the eye anyway, something that made him smile sweetly, like he hadn't done since the birth of his first daughter, Hannah. As I said, William's voice pulled Daniel out of his trance, who motioned for the guards to shut the lid and take the chest away. It shall take any evil and bind it within itself. Which, if I may, Jasper said with a genuine smile and more colour to his cheeks, gives it something of an aura, like the beauty of a good woman. I thank you. Now, how much do these fetch? They discussed the price briefly before Daniel counted the coins in front of them and set the purse into William's palms, a hefty sum, but worth it for his family's vengeance. Then, with kisses to their cheeks, Daniel climbed back into his carriage and left the fishers, Jasper hurriedly sprinting around the manor for the horses. But Daniel didn't smile at that. He didn't admire the white stone of the fountains or the way the light made rainbows in their mist, nor the polished gleam of the white stone walls surrounding the grounds like it had just rained. His mind was bent on the egg, likely lain in one of the southern fields rather than the newer northern ones, if rumour could be believed. Then he furrowed his brow and laughed, wondering aloud how, amongst 7 fields and 70 times 7 geese laying eggs that would curse the holder, William hadn't befallen his own curses. Furthermore, if they didn't hatch geese, then how did he breed the gold-laying creatures? But then the egg glinted behind Daniel's eyes, and steered his thoughts to a vision of it in the hands of one of the Allans, before it would shatter on the ground. He smiled and shut his eyes as the band took marching way for the house of his enemies, the enemies of his blood, as men had marched on the woods folk all those generations ago. But he would not lose this fight. He could not. 2 hours later, Daniel's carriage stopped a little ways from Allen Manor in the northwest. The trees of the North Woods, grown up high and undisturbed, save for the broad path leading from town into the forest. The trees were shedding their leaves there, some littering the ground or torn from the fierce frigid wind that fell out of the south. But Daniel's skin only bristled under the cold, thick body warm despite his drastic change in dress and look. Gone were the fiery robes and ornate staff, gone too was his hair, and rings, and boots. Instead, he stood in drab shirts and trousers, tucked into thick old boots, all the colour of dead leaves, mud, and fresh wood. Beneath the shirts was stuffed a pillow that made his belly look even larger, and small bladders in his sleeves to make him sag. Then his head. It was freshly shaven, the hair left to fly with the leaves as he looked in the mirror and patted down the edges of his new beard, glued to his face and fashioned from his cousin's own hair. His broad nose looked almost small over the thick moustache, but the small jowl he'd developed under his iron jaw was gone beneath the long, roughed-up beard. He thought perhaps he should grow one, though not as long. Or maybe longer. At any rate, it was fixed to his face, and his character complete. All that remained was to walk down the path with chest in hand and present it to the Allans. He called for the guards to bring him the chest, and removed the last of his earrings and handed them to his coachman, turning to find the 2 strapping lads stopped, with the chest lifted. Without thanks, he motioned for them to spin it so it opened away from him, and took it by the handles once they had done. It wasn't so heavy, it certainly wasn't light either, but it should cost him nothing to walk it down the wooded path. And it didn't. Though his arms and legs bulged within his cheap costume and his back began to ache from the long walk, the chest never lilted, and he never had to stop for his breath, and didn't even pant as he crossed the little yard before the 3-story home made of block and stone from the north and southward alike. It was quaint and simple, but certainly not common. It was fashioned to resemble a commoner's cottage, but with stone instead of wood, and much, much larger. Large as his own home. But there were no great grounds with statues or ornate fixtures. Even the dwelling was bare of decoration apart from the trifling tree motifs on each door of their great entrance. And there were sprites or children carved into the corners of the windows and stag's antlers running the length of the tiled roof. Even the windows were simple, however small, and barred against wildlife. Finally, he stopped before the tree line of the yard and set the chest down with a great heave, acting as though he were quite tired and bending over to catch a breath he didn't need. He looked up through a squint to the 2 men either side the walkway of the great entrance, both leather-clad guards with metal fixed at the breast and gut, and plates over the forearms, forelegs, and between their legs. "Pardon," he said in a bad accent, "but my master's sent something for yours. My horse seems to have split her off, but the gift is unarmed. Call for one of the Lords Allen to receive a gift from Lord Fisher." "What is it?" one asked. the spear held in the crook of his elbow as he pushed off the block pillar he'd been leaning on. "Which are the Lords Allen?" the other asked. "There are indeed 3. "I don't rightly know what it is. I'd be a snivelling man to look at my master's private things. But it shouldn't matter which, methinks. It's a gift to the house of Allen, so whichever be most expedient that I might tend to my mare." He leaned sideways and stretched his back with a groan, twisting his face and squeezing his eyes as he cursed the walk and weight of the chest. The men sighed and looked between themselves, arguing with their eyes before one tossed up his arms and marched to the door, knocking and entering before it shut. Then Daniel sighed and heaved, bulging the sinew in his neck, as if he would strain so badly from the golden egg, and waddled closer until he could set the chest down and resume his panting fit, leaning against the unoccupied pillar. Then the door opened and the guard walked out, shooing Daniel aside to resume his post as he spoke, watching Lord Taylor stand, gasping, behind the chest. "The Lord William Allen shall see you before this step and evaluate the gift." No sooner had he finished the sentence than the doors opened again and Lord William Allen walked past, shooing the butler away and stopping him from making an announcement. "There's no need for that," he said, stepping outside in his housecoat and robes, brown eyes like dry dirt, auburn hair a short bush of large curls to his shoulders, his face a star map of freckles. "What do you bring from Lord Fisher?" Daniel smiled and bowed low, hands outstretched as he spoke, and rose. "Lord Allen, I was sent here to bestow a gift, but a secret one. It lay within this chest." He grabbed the lid and unlatched it, swinging it up on its noiseless hinges to sit open before anyone might protest. William Fisher stared as intently as his guards, the gold reflecting in their eyes and pulling away the looks of mistrust for one of awe. A grin tickled the corners of William Allen's mouth, the lines in his forehead washing away as he stepped closer, hypnotized in the light that wasn't there. "He tells me," Daniel said in a careful, low voice that didn't pull Lord Allen's eyes away, "that though this will not right a wrong already done, he hopes this might afford your family no more hardships after your nephew's dreadful ordeal." "No, indeed," Lord Allen said, kneeling before the chest. He smiled, his age almost evaporating from his face as he reached out and lifted the egg from the chest, eyebrows up in surprise with a stifled laugh. "It's much heavier than I thought, though it looks gold." "Indeed," Daniel said, broad hands at the ready, as he came around the chest to stand beside one of the enchanted guards, forcing his eyes away from the egg. "Gold is its shell, and hungry the prison within to keep all evils in your house held in its belly." Daniel stepped a little closer to the guard's shoulder and laced his fingers around the lower half of the spear shaft, other hand coming up as if to rub his shoulder. Then he spoke in a sweet, unassuming voice, as he let the mask fall away and showed the ire in his eyes and the turn of his mouth. "But should it break, the evil within shall be loosed upon the whole house." He chuckled. "But I tell a lie. A small one, my lord. This gift comes from the tailors." Lord Allen's body went taut, and he made to face Daniel with wide eyes, but before he could, Lord Taylor seized the spear, shoved the guard into the pillar with a clanking crash, and flung the blade down. It arched through the air, making Lord Allen retch back and stumble onto his side, the egg still in his hands, crashing down to the block steps, up to the entryway. And Daniel stood, the spear blade stuck long ways into the rim of the chest where it would have never touched Lord Allen. He smiled and let go of the spear so that it stuck out at an angle from the chest before it clattered free from its weight. Then he stalked around to stand over Lord Allen, eyes cool and smirk chiseled onto his plump face as his gaze settled on the crack in the golden egg. "Even one small crack, Lord Alan?" Daniel gloated, turning his title into a curse. "And all the evil inside shall befall the house of he who opened the prison of the golden egg." Lord Alan blinked and looked up, letting the egg fall from his hands with a cold clink and crack as the gold flecked away from the break. The Lord stood before the other. His face, once awestruck, was now twisted into something ugly, something like a snarling wolf, the true faces of the Allen men. "Behold!" Daniel laughed, stepping back and gesturing to Lord Alan's face. "The rage of an Allen bested. Finally, you are bested, and your house shall fall to ruin." Lord Alan let his fist fly and connect with Daniel's jaw. It hit so hard, Daniel's laugh died, and his head spun nearly over his shoulder with a rush of pops and cracks. Daniel sputtered and stumbled before he looked forward with another choir of crackings, in a flurry of biting pain and goosebumps. Daniel blinked, eyes out of sync as William Allen held his broken hand and hissed, eyebrows still cutting down over his nose as he snarled and met Lord Taylor's unsure gaze. Daniel opened his mouth to say something, but his jaw flopped, and his legs gave out, sending him like a sack of flour onto the chest, only to roll to his side on the ground. He sputtered something, groaning words and sounds muddled together, as the golden egg filled his eyes. The shell cracked open further, the thing inside breaking out like any other chick, but instead of a bill, there came black hands, wet and slick as ink and blood and refuse, stinking like death. Lord Alan opened his mouth to say something, the guards now both holding the spear point at Daniel's throat, but then they all gagged and heaved, whirling around until they stared at the broken egg. The thing inside whimpered and purred as it broke open the thick shell, sending gold all over the steps and ground alongside its black mucus. Its clawed hands grabbed the edge, pulling itself up to reveal the misshapen head and twisted body as it fell over the edge and tumbled to the steps. A little, diseased man. He was naked, save for the thick black slime dripping off him and out of him, though it never seemed to fall away enough to reveal the flesh beneath. Its head was wide with a flat top and a huge brow, though its eyes were small, seemingly useless. Its nose was pointed like a stick, with mouth parts that jutted forward like a broken muzzle, as malformed lips peeled up in a kind of high-pitched snarl that wasn't as fearsome as it had thought. All the men save Daniel covered their noses, because when Daniel tried, he couldn't move his hands. In fact, he couldn't breathe. But as the world dimmed at the edges and the cold gripped him at his spine, telling him to run and breathe and kick to stay alive, he could only smile as the little homunculus scratched up the steps to look at Lord Alan. It opened its jaws and screeched, louder and louder, until the men covered their ears and the creature bolted inside, twisted back, bowed legs, squashed head and all. Then the screech faded, and human voices replaced it. There was a clamor. Something crashed. Someone screamed. Men cursed and blamed each other as Lord Alan rushed inside and stared at whatever had just happened, twisting round to look for the homunculus and glaring at Daniel through the door. But Daniel only grinned as the last light faded in his eyes and dreams flashed there instead. The dreams of the three Lords Alan, huddled naked together, dirty and scrawny, as their children died in the dirt around them, and Eleanor, the lost beauty, mounted him like a charger and turned his seed into a son, as William Allen watched in dismay. Then the dreams ended, and Lord Daniel Taylor was dead, as the house of Allen uprose and fell in 100 tiny waves, all at once. 6 geese are laying, 5